Welcome to tonight, which is the third Building Product Ecosystems public event held here at Parsons, the New School for Design, sponsored by the Durst organization. For some of you who don't know me, my name is Jonsara Ruth, and I'm the director of the MFA Interior Design program here at Parsons. This event series runs simultaneously to a course by the same name, which I'm teaching with my colleagues Allison Mears, who's the Dean of the School of Design Strategy, and Bill Walsh, who is the Executive Director of the Healthy Building Network. Tonight's program is the last event in this series this fall, which aims to raise awareness and bring deeper understanding to the relationship of building materials and human health. Robin Guenther, the primary speaker tonight, has titled it Solving for Pattern and Building Health. We're thrilled to host these guests tonight who have agreed to share their experience and expertise with us tonight. Following the talks, there will be a reception here right on stage. We encourage you to stay and come and speak with all the speakers so that the conversations continue in more informal ways. And to introduce the bigger program tonight, I'm pleased to introduce our colleague Amanda Kaminsky, the Sustainable Construction Manager for the Durst organization. She's also a crucial founder and leader for the BPE, Building Product Ecosystems Initiative, and a person who inspires so many of us, so many people, to continue working towards making a change to a healthier future for buildings. Her spirit is contagious. You'll soon find out. Thanks.
On behalf of the Durst organization, welcome everybody, and thanks to the New School for hosting tonight. The Building Product Ecosystems Initiative is targeting holistic improvements, engaging experts from a host of various disciplines to come together in working groups, in research, and in education to solve systemic problems. Our speakers tonight are seasoned experts in working with this mindset. And there's nobody like Suzen Szenasy to help maximize deep learning from the work of good design practitioners and product manufacturers. Suzen is publisher, editor-in-chief of Metropolis, the award-winning New York City-based magazine of architecture, culture, and design. She has led the publication and its other media platforms through decades of landmark design journalism, achieving domestic and international recognition. Suzen is a pioneer in connecting environmental stewardship with design and a tireless advocate for human-centered design. A book of her writings and talks, Szenasy, Design Advocate, was recently published by Metropolis Books, distributed art publishers. Ladies and gentlemen, Suzen Szenasy.
Hi, everyone. Oh, there's some people back there. Hello there. So I'm just going to do some very brief introductions, and not of the people, but of the evening. And then we will, when we gather, we will meet all of the panelists. But for now, I would like to say that we will begin with a presentation by Robin Guenther, who is principal at Perkins & Will, and herself a tireless advocate for healthy design. She was the first one, in fact, that we started turning to when we wanted to know what healthy products were, because there was a time not too long ago when nobody would share, no manufacturer would share information with us, and in fact they laughed us out of the room. So Robin was very serious about these issues a very long time ago, and we've been relying on her and her team for quite a while. Every time I get one of these news releases that claims something that the product does, I would call one of her handy chemically involved and knowledgeable people to check this out. And so it's been invaluable to us, the relationship with her. So Robin will give a 30-minute talk about the challenge of working with petrochemical-derived materials and her personal history of in healthcare and her personal ingestion of these chemicals. So, you know, I love that story, so I'm sure that you will be enlightened by it too. And then what we will do is have a a discussion with panelists, and I will describe the panelists and who they are, and they will describe themselves to you. And then after that, we will get you involved, maybe put the lights up and get you all involved in the conversation, because this is a conversation that every one of us needs to have. And so that there is a contribution from all of us who has anything worthwhile to say here in this room. So then that will wind down, everything will wind down after you express your wisdom on the subject. We will wind down at about 8 o'clock. So that's where we are for now. And so Robin Guenther, where are you? Please come up and share your wonderful knowledge with us.
Thank you, and thank you all for weathering the crazy weather to be here in person, and hi to anyone who's watching this live stream. I want to start by just acknowledging that I am an architect with a real fascination with building materials, and I can't tell you the origin of that fascination because I don't know where it comes from. But let's start by actually talking about what is a material. And so, you know, definitionally, a material is anything made of matter, comprised of substances. And together, these substances make up the building materials that we use to construct our built environments. But the reality is, we don't know very much about what those substances and those materials are comprised of. If we think about what we believe about building materials, when we look at this carpet, do we see a sheep? When we look at wall covering, do we think about paper or trees or grass, fiber? And when we look at textiles, do we see cotton or wool? I think before 1900, most of our building materials were actually those things. In fact, in 1900, 41% of our materials were made from renewable feedstocks. But the Second World War really changed all that, and there was a revolution in material science, so that by 1995, only 6% of the materials that we use in our buildings were made from renewable feedstocks. And that shift in the building materials marketplace is really a shift to oil-based products. And actually, it's not the whole barrel of oil. Believe it or not, all the products that undergird the petrochemical material revolution in building products comes from the little orange band called 6.8% of a barrel of oil, the stuff that's left when they refine oil to make gasoline and fuel. And that former waste product is the genesis of many of the petrochemically based building materials that we now fill our buildings with. So, and petrochemicals are not the only non-renewable feedstock. We can talk about minerals, we can talk about metals. There are many other non-renewable feedstocks that we use in building materials. But this one is really the sleeper that came on the scene. And so where are we today? Whoops, where are we today? If we have a built environment that's responsible for almost half the flow of goods and services in the economy, and therefore is responsible for some of the overconsumption that we've been experiencing since the 1970s, when we hit the tipping point of consuming more resources than the earth can resupply. So there are some people in this room, actually, that were not even alive at a moment in time when we knew how to live within the means of the planet, that have not experienced anything but the overconsumption of this economy. So if we actually think about this carpet, if it's really not made of wool, what is it made of? This is the ingredient list of nylon broadloom carpet. I actually would challenge anyone to find one thing in this carpet that sounds familiar. Okay, citric acid. There you go. You found one thing. And consequently, we are really looking at the tip of an iceberg. This is the 3 billion tons a year, 50% of the flow of goods and services. And what we have to realize is that this is a problem of time as well as space. That these impacts happen from the moment these materials are extracted through all the aspects of their life cycle, and they happen at every scale. But if we start with the time axis, what happens with aluminum? Aluminum, actually, the production of aluminum requires 3% of global electricity. When you recycle aluminum, it uses 5 to 10% of that quantity of energy to recycle. But when we look at aluminum extractions in a catalog, on a project site, in a building, and I'm sure you'll find a few if you look around this room, do we actually see this mine? Do we think about what it means to pull bauxite out of the earth and to use 3% of the world's power to actually get those extrusions? I don't think so. We don't actually think about the aspects, the health aspects of large-scale building material manufacturing, where it happens, whether it's the airborne contaminants that find their way into the food supply. It's just not on the package. And we don't really think about what happens when we deconstruct our buildings. Like, we're all very proud of talking about the lead points for construction waste recycling, and let's not say that that's not important. But do we really think about the building materials we put in today actually being the feedstock of tomorrow? That when that building actually comes down in 50 years, what legacy are we leaving to the people who walk in there and deconstruct it? And how much of that process, how much extraction does that really offset? If we look at steel, steel is the most recycled building product in the industry. The recycling of steel is more than all the recycling of all the other materials combined today. And it's very clever because steel's magnetic, so it's actually pretty easy to pull steel out of large piles of aggregated metal. We recycle about 88% of steel that comes out of buildings, and we offset about 40% of virgin steel production through that recycling. But that's one material. That's a marker, but it's one material. And then if we talk about the scale aspect, do we really understand the chemicals in these materials and their human health impacts? When we put them in the buildings, do we understand what they mean in the aggregate to the indoor air quality or toxic dust? When we put our buildings in communities, do we think about the health aspects of the habitat destruction, of the sedentary lifestyle? Clearly we haven't, and it's taken a generation of public health professionals to actually bring that to our attention as designers, that our built environments do have impacts. And have we really thought about what happens when the greenhouse gas goes up the flue? I think not, or we wouldn't have more than 400 parts per million of CO2. So everywhere around us, the legacy of building products is having impacts on health. And it's now time for us to confront those, because the sad truth is there's kind of no away anymore. It's all coming home to roost. So that brings me to Wendell Berry and the Solving for Pattern essay that some of you know is the basis of this lecture. Wendell Berry, farmer and philosopher, amazing man, talks about this phenomenon and says that these are solutions that cause a ramifying series of new problems. The only limiting criterion being, apparently, that the new problems should arise beyond the purview of the expertise that created the first problem. Doesn't that sound familiar? So as long as the issue is created or goes somewhere else, we don't really have to think about it. These are solutions, he says, that solve for a single purpose or goal. And I would say that Ken Geiser's quote that basically says when we see the results of this thinking, whether it's the depletion of the environment or impairment of human health, those are symptoms of a poorly designed and functionally flawed industrial production economy. We tend to think if we just had more environmental protection, things would be different. And environmental protection does cause changes in manufacturing, but it is fundamentally a design problem. If we care about health, this can't continue. We need to find another way. So I design healthcare facilities, not this one. But my own journey in this world began with the PVC floors that healthcare provider is walking on. And the first thing I learned was that vinyl is a problem for building occupants. And the way I learned that was that I saw the statistic that that healthcare workers account for more than 40% of adult occupational asthma. And that issue is linked to the cleaning chemicals used to wax and clean those floors, strip those floors. But it didn't really end there for me. I then learned about a place called Cancer Alley in Louisiana that's home to 150 chemical plants, including vinyl manufacturing, where 91% of residents have at least one health problem linked to chemical exposure. And even though it's a cheap product, it enriched someone at the expense of this family. Third, I saw this exhibit of photos of victims of mesothelioma, which is asbestos poisoning. And I was an architect who came of age in practice after we stopped putting asbestos in buildings, but at the beginning of when we were paying a lot of money to remove it. And this idea of removing asbestos in buildings was sort of treated as a joke in professional practice. It was like, too bad we have to spend this money when we really would like to be buying more of those aluminum extrusions, when we'd really like to be doing something else. Because no one ever showed us these photos. No one ever connected for us that there was a real human issue on the backside of that building material. And finally, I learned that this ad, which was put together by the World Wildlife Fund and ran in the UK, actually was it was about chemical trespass in human bodies. This was challenged in court and ultimately removed from print, not because it was incorrect, but because it was, quote, unduly alarming. And that there was something fundamentally wrong with implying that all these chemicals could be found in individuals, as opposed to just seeing it as some sort of general human problem. This was the one that really did it for me. And so by 2006, I'd been talking about chemicals in building products and decided that I would have my own chemical body burden tested. And this turned out to be, by that time, Bill Moyers had done it on PBS, and the CDC was doing it. This covers from 2009, but they started doing chemical body burden on Americans in the early 2000s. And so I decided in 2006, 2007 to do this, but you can't imagine how complicated it is to have your body burden tested. You can't just make an appointment with your doctor and go have it done. And part of it is really true complexity, that the tubes that they might use to extract the samples could in fact have the chemicals in it that they're testing you for, and those chemicals might leach out of the tubing. So yes, it has to be a controlled process. But I also learned that if you go rogue and you find some doctor that is magically willing to draw these vials of blood and take your urine and send it away to the right labs, you're not actually allowed to stand up here and talk about it in public, because it's a little bit like that World Wildlife Fund thing. It could be unduly alarming. So unless you do it the right way, unless you join a cohort of people in a controlled testing environment, you can't really get body burden testing, because, God forbid, you started declaring that you had chemicals that you really didn't have. And so I joined a cohort that was in process with the Environmental Working Group, and I am Anonymous Adult 21. You can find my results at this website. And I was tested for 84 chemicals. They found about half of them, little under half of them, in my body. And you can see that my mercury exposure level was above the federal government's safe level. I had the highest level of phthalates of anyone they had tested. And this was clearly fairly alarming to me, because I don't remember ingesting any of these chemicals. I didn't like pick up a mercury thermometer and suck it down. It wasn't on any labels of any products that I was using. It wasn't advertised in any product literature. Believe me, on the phthalates, I went back and looked at every personal care product. I sort of looked around my house. I didn't have a vinyl shower curtain. I had sort of like gotten rid of a lot of that stuff a long time ago. And so to me, this was shocking. Some of these chemicals are carcinogens. Some of them are endocrine disruptors. And most of them, this is actually the whole list, most of them have never been tested for safety. So when you look at this and you go back to my friend Wendell Berry, he says about this that a bad solution acts within a larger pattern the way a disease or an addiction acts within the body, not unlike whatever those chemicals are doing to me. But a good solution acts the way a healthy organ acts within the body. A good solution solves more than one problem, and it doesn't make new problems. And he challenges us to think that when health is the aim, we find solutions that solve for pattern, solutions that create cascading series of benefits instead of externalized harm. So I know as an architect that there's this kind of emerging movement, many of you know about it, called regenerative design or restorative design. And that's the aim of restorative or regenerative design, is to find exactly those solutions. It's about moving beyond doing less harm to true solutions that do no harm or actually start healing some of the harm we've already done. But mostly, it's about solutions that stop making us sick. And so I went back to Bill McDonough. And you know, one of his better quotes, I think, is that he said, to be less bad is to believe that these poorly designed, dishonorable systems are the best we can do. And I think we accept less bad every day. And we think it's the best we can do. So, how do we connect our materials with their stories, with their consequences? Because I will tell you, we won't build healthy buildings until we do. And we've started. whether you look at the documentary on blue vinyl or Toxic Hot Seat that was screened here 2 weeks ago, or cartoon books about environmental causation of cancer, or the new asthma report of HBN, or our hot off the press report on flame retardants in the built environment. Like, all these things help us to connect the dots, but the point is to connect them and then to act. And so first we have to know what's in the materials. We have to know whether those chemicals that are in my body burden test are actually in the carpet on the floor or in the wall covering on the wall. And so how do we do that? And I'm going to go back to the cereal analogy and ask us to imagine if the ingredients in that cereal were a trade secret. Obviously they're not, but once upon a time they were. 100 years ago, we didn't have food labeling. And food labeling actually came about for a really important reason that I think we can learn a lot of lessons from. And I'm going to read a quote about that. It said, with the industrialization of the food system, a market for lemons developed. And they mean that the way we talk about a car as a lemon. And what they mean by that is they said in a market with two unlabeled food products, one safe and one not, the manufacturer knows which is the better product, but the consumer doesn't. So the manufacturer who substitutes worse and worse ingredients that are cheaper and can sell his product at a lower cost takes the market, and the more nutritious and better product is ultimately forced out. That's what prompted the US government to label food. And I actually think we have an interesting analogy in that in the building materials marketplace. And I bet any of you who practice can think of many more than this one. And you know, with food labeling, I'll just add this. We went from just declaring the ingredients to actually using the label to help people improve their nutrition. So imagine if we did building product labeling that not only disclosed the ingredients, but then actually ranked its nutrition or its healthiness. Imagine the tool that a consumer would have if that were the case. But I want to talk about these two products, because of course I'm like ragging on vinyl here. And that's how linoleum was replaced by vinyl in the United States. So I don't know how many of you know this, but you know, linoleum floors, the picture on the left, actually replaced painted oilcloths in residences, which in the 18th century was the primary flooring if you didn't just use your wood floors. And it came on the market in about 1880, and it was the preferred flooring product until the 1950s, until vinyl, the picture on the right, came in the market. And here are the kind of differences between those products. Linoleum, carbohydrate-based, largely renewable, recyclable. Vinyl, petroleum-based, PBT-producing, largely non-renewable, not recyclable. But none of the consumers in the 1950s saw any of that. Instead, they looked at these ads. Up-to-date styling, years to come savings. Laid to your own design. The brightest, gayest, cheeriest, prettiest floor you can find. No one talked about any of those attributes. And actually in the 1950s, we might say, well, people weren't really worried about recycling building materials, but they knew how to recycle their milk bottles. And so all of this drove linoleum, particularly the years to come savings, out of the marketplace. So that's an example of how we went from 41% renewable material feedstock to 6%. And just as we live in a world where food makes health claims, we now live in a world where building materials are making health claims. Humane, earth-friendly, And this one that Tom Linton I think is the best, packing peanuts that save the world. Because you care. So how do we sort this out? Some things just don't change. We are still prey to the same forces of the marketplace. But now we can take apart the marketplace with information. So whether you look at the Mother Jones article on the left, where they sort of took apart Fiji water, what's the spin versus what's the facts, or if you think about the impact that the Chicago Tribune series had on driving flame retardants out of commerce, we can make change with information. So how do we do that? In 2012, the Harvard Business Review basically warned business that this was coming, this age of information. And they basically said to businesses, you better kind of get your act together and take ownership of your direct impacts, because if you don't, you will be found out. And it will separate the winners in business from the losers in business. So that implies that there's a new kind of consumer, a consumer that actually connects the whole chain of impacts and converts it to market value. And they said, there's kind of three levels. You have to take ownership of your direct impacts, your fossil fuel emissions, your toxics. Then there's a kind of second ring where you don't have such direct control over it. It's up your supply chain, it's downstream from you. But there you still have to take some action. And then there's the third ring that they defined as taking interest, which are really the far off impacts of your decisions as a manufacturer or a business person. And that's the ones like, let's say, working conditions, where you don't really have any way to influence whether a supplier of yours is using child labor. But even the Harvard Business Review said, trust us, if you know that's the case, you better find someone to work with who's going to work on that problem, because all those problems ultimately now affect the value of your product. And I would ask all of us to keep advocating, because this kind of pressure does create change. So what has been the building material response? First of all, we tried certifications. Like, that was the first step, really, before we could actually get anybody to tell us what was in it. A bunch of people set up certification systems to try and help us feel better about the product without actually telling us what was in it. And some of them are more effective than others. FSC is pretty effective, but I think we've all kind of, in a way, have certification fatigue. We don't really know what these certifications mean. We don't know how deep they go. It's hard to actually pick products. Once like Green Guard certified, everything is Green Guard certified, so it doesn't really become a differentiator anymore. But it worked for a little while we were putting the pressure on to actually find out what's in them. And so there have been a whole series of things, whether it's the green screen or Pharos, or the Declare label, or now the Just label for the social responsibility aspects of building products, or Cradle to Cradle, that started certifying product about its chemical composition. But that's actually in a black box, so that's still not as much disclosure as these other ones. But we're making headway, and clearly the new kid on the block, which is the Health Product Declaration, which Amanda and Bill and maybe some others in this room are really working hard to bring into being, is the best we've done to date at really getting to know what's in our building materials. But as this information starts pouring out of these HPDs, we still have to know whether it's bad or good, and what are the health impacts of that chemical, and are those health impacts better or worse than the impacts of the substitute chemical in the other product that we could use instead? And this is dizzying for all of us. And so at Perkins & Will, we put out this kind of precautionary list to try and talk about, at least put a kind of definition around what were the worst actor substances in building products, and the red list of the Living Building Challenge tried to do the same thing, and the declare label to declare your red list chemicals. And Tom Lent at Healthy Building Network tried to actually take all the red lists and made this amazing diagram of how complicated that world's gotten. If we thought certification was complicated, red lists are even more complicated. Which chemicals are in, which ones are out, which red lists are looking for what. So this idea of red lists is good, and it helps us deal with the information that's coming out of disclosure. But it isn't really the answer. And if what we're after is to remake a materials economy beyond being less bad, getting rid of these chemicals may be less bad, but is it really good? What's on the other side of this? So that's where I want to go now, is to what happens beyond red. So Daniel Goldman says, we can train ourselves to think differently about building materials. We can sort of develop an innate sense of what's bad and what's good. Raise your hand if you think you're capable of that in this materials economy. Okay, some people think so. So Tom Lent and I, a few years back, thought it would be an interesting idea to develop a set of principles. And we actually looked at Michael Pollan's food rules, and we thought, look what Michael Pollan's food rules has done for the food industry about simplifying choice. Don't buy anything that has an ingredient list longer than 5. Don't buy a food that your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize. Like, these are sort of laughable, but in a certain way really true. I also liked his don't buy food at the same place you gas your car as a kind of rule of thumb about bad food versus good food. And so Tom and I, and along with some other folks, thought we'd try some material rules. And so you can download these rules from the Perkins and Will website. They're publicly available. So I don't want you to like try and write them down, because you can just get them at this website. But just read them and think about this. And I'll be quiet for a second. This one in the middle actually came from Larry Page at Google. That was one of actually the generators of the idea, was when I heard that that's what he did. He walked on job sites and picked up samples and smelled them, and if they stunk, he got rid of the product. It's just sort of an interesting way to think about it. Simple and probably pretty effective. And so this kind of brings me to the last part of this talk, which is how do we get restorative and regenerative with our materials? So how do we create a materials economy that solves for pattern, that is good in all respects? That's really the challenge of our age. David Orr says, it's nothing less than a rethinking and remaking of our role in the natural world. And it's a sort of remaking to coincide with the way the biophysical world works. And so I want to actually just, for a couple minutes, take a look at where people are going with this. Beginning with the notion of cradle-to-cradle design, not cradle-to-cradle certification, but the basis of the idea of cradle-to-cradle design, which many of us, we're so used to seeing the certification system that we've sort of lost touch with the cornerstone principles of cradle-to-cradle, which is really a regenerative materials economy where waste equals food, where waste becomes the nutrients of the next idea, of the next material, and where, in fact, a materials economy grows health, wealth, and useful resources. And that to me is sort of, when you read this and then you think about cradle-to-cradle certification of products, you really see how the two are hardly related. And then if we think about green chemistry, also a really good set of goals. But what's interesting to me is that there's been actually very little penetration of green chemistry in the building products industry to date. And it was interesting that when John Warner was here, the thing that everybody actually ran down to talk to him about on stage at the end of his talk was his healthy men's hair dye as his kind of, useful product from green chemistry. That's hardly a solution for our carpet or our wall covering or our ceiling tiles. So I think green chemistry has a lot of promise, but as he points out, it's almost a generational thing. We have to wait for green chemists to graduate, to penetrate the echelons of product designers. And that's just time. And then there's biomimicry, which is in a lot of ways the kind of foundation of cradle to cradle and the foundation of green chemistry. It's, can we ultimately emulate life's genius? In a biomimetic world, we will manufacture the way animals, plants, and ecosystems do. That is a far cry from today. And the most, actually, if you think about materials and biomimicry materials, the one that is really the household word is Velcro. Velcro is the classic biomimetic material. This chemist was taking the burrs off his dog's coat, he put it under the microscope, and he said, I wonder how these things attach. And then he made Velcro. And so it's clear that he was able to mimic, in a sense, the form and the function, but that burr is going to biodegrade, and I don't know whether most of the contents of that piece of Velcro will. So it's really about the intention of a designer in a biomimetic process. If we think about the shark skin bathing suits, that's another one. They can kind of mimic the performance of a shark skin, but not the materiality or the chemistry of a shark skin. So biomimicry can go many ways. And so I'll end really with this idea of ecological design, where we sort of mimic an organism or behavior, and so we try to build ventilation systems that act like termite mounds. And this is another really laudable set of goals for a design process and a materials design process. But we have a ways to go before our building materials start repairing themselves, or are self-reliant, or have large margins for error. So I want to end actually on, I want to go back to the first lecture here where the guy from Ecovative was here and talked about growing a substitute for polystyrene insulation using mushrooms and agricultural waste. And ask people to think about, of all those things, biomimicry, ecological design, like where would you put this product in categorizing it? Is it biomimetic? Not really. It's not mimicking nature. It is nature. It's growing insulation. And I clipped this ad about the fact that there's a company that's going to start mass producing leather where they don't need the cows. They're just going to grow the hides from cells. So you'll be able to harvest leather without killing or growing the animal. And the reason I became fascinated with this was that is really because, again, in this Solving for Pattern essay, Wendell Berry says we have to get better at distinguishing between what's biological and what's mechanical. And I overlaid that idea on the diagram I showed you earlier. And to basically say that I think what we actually have to confront is how do we move from technological sustainability, which deals with making our technical processes more efficient, to getting to ecological sustainability, which really means supporting biocapacity and natural systems, as being a move from a technological or mechanical order to a biological order. And I think when Wendell Berry looks at his farm and sees that in farming, we have to see that in building materials as well. And I'm ending really with Nina Tandon. I met Nina Tandon at TEDMED this year. She's actually at Columbia University. She's a tissue engineer. And she did like a 6-minute talk there about maybe how we're entering the third industrial revolution. And she didn't show Ecovative, she actually showed the tissue engineering leather as one of her examples. But she characterized the industrial revolutions like this. She said the first industrial revolution was about making things from resources, sort of taking things out of the earth and manufacturing. The second one is really the information age, so it's technology, computers, it's all that stuff that we surround ourselves with. And the third one is growing things from cells. And I ask you to think about what you think it means for us to stand on the edge of growing materials again, but this time, rather than them being agricultural products, we're growing them from cells. And is that the same or is it different? Because those are the decisions that the younger people in this room are going to have to confront as they take this topic on. So what is a regenerative materials economy? What does it look like? Would we know it if somebody put it in front of us? And what's the commitment that each of us will make to bringing that economy into being? And I will say that we have to start with health. And we have to remember Wendell Berry's comment that when health is the aim, all these negative external impacts become unacceptable. That's what we have to lay down as the ultimate criteria. So thank you.
Let's call the panel up, please. And I will introduce you as you arrive. Thanks, Robin. Now, there was one part of your talk that was really interesting to me because I've been reading and talking a lot about the information that's out there for us and how information is imparted today. And so with all the unemployed journalists working for manufacturers, writing the manufacturer's story of great innovation, I'm not kidding, this is so disturbing. I mean, we just had one of those conversations where somebody was telling me how important it is what Exxon puts out about its research. And that, you know, I mean, that's not a reported, that's a reported piece about the manufacturer's processes. So, that adds an even more, a bigger offensive layer to all of this because the information is just completely, screwed up, and you're not getting anything. You're getting their idea of what innovation is, and therefore you're really not dealing with any of the things that you mentioned. So, how do we begin even to fight that? I mean, Cliff, you're a manufacturer. What do you do about this? I mean, you have your Cliff Goldman, Goldman of Carnegie, and I mean, you have the anti-vinyl, incredible material that your dad and his chemist invented. How many years ago?
33
years ago. That really, basically, is probably the only one of its kind still. Zorel is still the only one of its kind. I mean, first of all, your assessment on this sort of misinformation that's going on? Because you read a lot of things, you look at a lot of things. What is your thought on this? I mean, you just dismiss it and you say, I'm not going to pay attention to Exxon, or what do you do about
I
it?
think marketing's the American way. So everyone's got a good story to tell, and they have a little bit of truth, and then they sort of expand on it to make it into a campaign. So I think it's often the marketing people sort of overriding the real product development and science behind it, and that's where you get a lot of misinformation, and it's pretty typical of bigger companies too, I think. The bigger the company, the more misinformation.
But I mean,
very often.
is there a way to kind of, how does this audience get suspicious of that? Because you don't know if it's a marketing message. I mean, it's pretty credible. It sounds interesting, as Exxon is doing all of this great research. So how do we begin to say that we are looking for real hardcore information? I mean, some of the stuff that you showed, all those materials that are within that one carpet. I mean, how many are there? Like 50?
I don't know, 75?
75. So, I mean, we don't even begin to understand that little part of it. And then you add all this misinformation on top of it, and it's like you want to run for the hills, and you can't do that because you have to make a stand. So, what do you say?
I said in the talk that I think we have to figure out how to create our own exposure chains. And I think now social networks can do a lot for that. And I just think we have to get stronger as professionals in the interior design and architecture industry to create a kind of market social media that takes apart those claims and creates a kind of anti-buzz. Sort of the way, that's why I use the Fiji water cover, because, I think that actually made a big dent in Fiji's market share, that cover on Mother Jones. They were actually going around the country buying all the magazines off the shelves, right? Because they realized that it was really bad for their product line. But I think, when the EPA, there was a meeting with the EPA about flame retardants, and I think someone in the audience asked them whether the Chicago Tribune series helped the EPA take a stand on flame retarders. And they said it did. They said you can't underestimate in this era of government how much individual and market action matters to us. It gives us the strength to actually legislate. And so I think, and it's true, I mean, you can see that that's what happened with flame retardants, is the Tribune story did that. So how do we create mini versions of that in our industry that begin to create that buzz? And we've seen it happen a little at Greenbuild and sort of the anti-campaigns that usually HBN is behind, but sometimes it's other people.
Yeah, so I mean, I think all that social media can be really, really helpful because it builds constituency, it builds a base, and it really does help. And we're all witnesses to some of that. But I think what I'd like to hear from is Suzen Heeley, who is the Executive Director of Design and Construction at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So Robin mentioned that obviously health is where you begin to attack this. And basically hospitals are, I just don't see them being about health. I mean, they really are not making you healthy. They're you go in and you come back with a kind of infection that you never expect to have. I mean, the bugs that you grow in these sealed up places are phenomenally strong, and And all the manufacturers are trying to scrub these materials clean, and the manufacturers are really, really trying. I have to say, I commend the furnishings manufacturers in the architectural industry, because there's a lot of efforts. But no matter what they do, if the hospitals are designed in a way that they can't breathe, they can't get exposure to sunlight, that the patients aren't at the center of them, we're talking to ourselves. So what's Memorial Sloan Kettering doing about this?
Well, I think the challenge is that inherently there are always arguments for both sides, and there's always data on both sides. So we're always trying to get to the heart of that data, and really at some point you're making compromises. We make what we feel are the best material selections based on the data that we have. But beyond that, we have to deal with those hospital-acquired infections. So we're using products like bleach to combat those things. And at that point, we're adding yet another layer of toxic chemicals into our environment. I think it's also interesting that when we began, one of our first buildings had wards where there were multiple patients lined up, and they had rounded corners in the rooms. And the thinking at that point was that that infection couldn't grow or accumulate because there weren't any corners. So we've come a long way, obviously, but we're still solving some of the challenges in an inappropriate way.
So the question that arises naturally is that because the issue of infection has become so top of mind, and it is not only incredibly costly, what is it, $30 billion a year, but also incredibly, what is it, 130,000 people die of hospital-acquired, infections. So, and there's no matter what you come out with something, with either pneumonia or cold or whatever you're coming out with. You are there for the cure, but you're leaving with something else. So we now know this. Where is the missing question that is not being asked, Robin?
Well, I think the missing question is why we keep loading our materials with untested performance enhancements. It's like athletes with performance-enhancing drugs. Like we keep loading these materials on. We load on the antimicrobials. We load on the flame retardants. We load on the stain resistors, and really what motivates manufacturers to do that is to make a market distinction.
Yeah.
That's all they're trying to do. I mean, that was what vinyl was doing with linoleum. It was trying to make a market distinction. And so it sort of loads on this supposed performance enhancement. But I would think if in the healthcare industry, what is really been happening is the unmasking of these performance enhancements as not really doing what they say they do. I mean, that's the flame retardant story, that's the antimicrobial story, that's the stain resistor story. Like we have to end our love affair with the greatest, newest performance enhancements and tell these manufacturers that we're not interested anymore in that stuff. Mm-hmm. Because I do think part of the hospital-acquired infections and part of the issue for all of us is that we have way too many antibiotics in us, we have way too many antimicrobials in us, we have way too much of that stuff. And so when you go in that hospital, they can't cure you because nothing works anymore. We're so loaded with this stuff. And that ultimately is why I think you're beginning to see healthcare organizations like Memorial Sloan Kettering, like Kaiser, standing up and saying, no more. No more antimicrobials, no more antibiotics in meat that we buy, no more, because we can't do our job. if you want to save those 100,000 lives, you better look upstream because we can't do it all. And I think that's been a big problem with building materials. I mean, once somebody talks about antimicrobials, everything has antimicrobials.
Right.
Yeah.
Even things that would have no business having antimicrobials.
Like soap.
Like soap. Like,
Yeah.
like, oh, we can just add that in. It's cheap, it's a cheap ingredient, we can put it in, and then we can say we have something. So,
Well, and then
It's
when
the
you think
marketing
about
hype.
all of those materials layered on top of each other. So we have an environment where we have all of these materials that have all of these added benefits, and who knows what we're creating? You know, we call it a toxic cocktail.
Okay, so
of
let's
sorts.
talk about some ways forward, because I can't deal with this anymore. God damn it, I mean, I can't stand it. What are we doing? You know, we're accepting everything, and we're just naturally talking about this as if this wasn't a health hazard, and it's a huge health hazard. So let's talk about what happened when the stain repellent material question came up. What exactly happened that it became discredited, that it could become discredited? I heard the conversation around it, that it had some issues, that it doesn't work, and but do you remember, does anybody, Cliff, do you remember what exactly was the conversation that actually led to this realization? Because that's what I want to trace back, and that's what I want to mime with these other materials that you're talking
Well,
about.
the chemistry goes way back, even to nonstick pans and things that, to Scotchgard and Teflon, going back to the 50s. And again, it was an enhancement. It was a sales opportunity for companies to say, now you can keep your sofa clean, or if you spill on it, you can clean it off. The reality is, in commercial interiors, it's for the most part pretty wasteful and useless, because unlike your home, where you might run to clean something off, in a facility, whether it's corporate or office or hospitality, no one's cleaning these materials. So you're adding chemistry again, and they're usually fluorocarbons, which have a significant environmental impact. But companies see a sales opportunity, and so that's how these products come about, like Krypton and Nanotex, and it's sort of the American way to find the next thing that will make designers' jobs easier or make them look better with the client. And I think architects and designers have to start to become better educated about whether these products really do anything, and to get in front of their client and say, it's not, all the marketing and things that you've seen are not necessarily true. It's not worth your expense, and it's not worth the impact on the materials you're putting in your space.
So Robin, a long time ago, you told me, and this was so inspiring to me, that you felt that as an architect and designer, you are the advocate for the person who uses that place. And I don't want to use that awful word user, because who the hell is the user, and why would we care about that? You care about a person. So, and you're still one of the few. So where is this not getting traction within the community that could be responsible for creating change with their questioning, with their saying, that flame retardant is proven to be not working, and this is what I'm reading. I don't want to buy it, and I'm speccing 500,000 square feet of carpet. Take it out of there. And so, to me, that purchase immediately, speaks powerfully. But why aren't the designers and architects speaking up in that manner when they have so much power?
well, I think that the fact that there's no uniform disclosure of this stuff still makes it really difficult to ensure that people even understand the material chemistry of the stuff they're dealing with. And people are making decisions with their clients day in and day out, thousands of decisions a week about products that go into buildings, and they're making decisions on a whole range of criteria. And the buildings cost ever more to build, and I think people worry the quality's going down while cost is going up. And so there's a whole millions of other ideas going on and other decision points in the equation besides what the base chemistry is. I mean, I was encouraged recently. I was at a client meeting about furniture, and my client said, this was in California, they said, oh, this is amazing. We can now buy furniture without flame retardants, and the price of the furniture is less. Imagine.
Well, and that's what I'd like to know. Where is the accounting? Because to apply that finish costs money. The finish itself costs money. The application itself costs money. The chemistry, the chemist that invented it costs money. I mean, everything is adding layers and layers of money to these products that basically could cost much less, be much more healthy, and much more organically informed, simple. So how do we begin to devise cost accounting for all that we do to everything? I mean, is that possible at all? I mean, we have been talking about life cycle cost. We have been talking about a lot of things for the past 20 years, and we're still back at where we were, and the infectious diseases are rampant, and the hospitals are germ farms, and so are the homes. I mean,
She likes hospitals, doesn't she?
no, I don't. I mean, they killed my sister. So, I mean, this is a real problem. And I think we all have that experience. And I just think that there is something really key here when it comes to human health. And is it that the design community teams up with the mothers of the world who protect their children, and the design community gets involved with these moms who really care. I mean, they're the ones who banned phthalates in California. Without them, nothing would have happened. Yeah. And so I just think that there needs to be more of a coalition formed now, because you're with all your great intentions, you're still fighting the battle you fought 15 years ago, although there are small improvements.
Yeah, you know, I like to think that as architects we can sort of shift our focus a little bit, and rather than simply, I think we all are used to putting ourselves in the occupant's seat, in the person's seat,
right,
and believing that somehow at the design table with our clients, we help them carry the load of advocating for the occupants of their building. And I think in healthcare, I feel like that's a load that I share with my clients, that they care as much about the occupant experience as I do. But I think neither of us necessarily verbalizes health. It's not the theory of the generalized good for the occupant. And I think you're seeing this come up in all markets right now. This new focus on wellness in the built environment, and really focusing on allowing all of us at any place we are in any building and built environment that we're in to continue to manage and advocate for our own wellness. And that's a new dialogue.
Yes,
I don't know why it's taken so long to get there, but I'm really encouraged by that dialogue, because I think that's the way in for me with my design peers to say, if that's really where we want to be, is in the middle of that dialogue, then you need to know what's in that material.
Yeah, exactly.
But the reality the reality is that we are all very pressured in the healthcare industry to bring costs down. So when you think about that, what's your most expensive resource? It's your staffing and your people that maintain the facilities.
So you have fat nurses and ill-mannered doctors and
well, and you have environmental services people that, you know, if we can buy products that have these added benefits and cut back on our staffing, why wouldn't we do that? So we, as healthcare providers that, like Robin said, really want to bring wellness to the forefront, we would look to our architectural and engineering consultants to bring this information to us and quantify it. What are the benefits that we can bring? So if the employees are well and they aren't out because of respiratory illnesses that are caused by off-gassing of these materials, then that's something that end users and owners want to hear about.
Well, but I would also like to suggest that let's harken back to Wendell Berry and let's talk about the systems. Let's talk about the whole system here, because fixing the hangnail is not going to get the headache to go away, because the headache is caused by something else. So let's kind of talk about the whole system here. And so healthcare institutions are not just about the institution within the walls, but the institution within the community. You provide employment, you are a resource to the community. So the healthcare institution's responsibility is way beyond its staff, but it is really creating a healthy community with jobs for the people who work there. So if we look at that part of the equation and look at it that way, how does the sort of the knee-jerk reaction that people are the most costly and therefore we're going to have to put technology in there and we're going to have to put all kinds of protective services in there because we can't afford the people. And at the same time, you're paying through the nose for all of these chemicals that come in through those various non-human services. So when is the question going to be asked about new standards of care? That's what I'd like to hear. Because is that question, there are standards of care that allow this kind of infectious world to occur. That means the standards of care really suck now. So how do we begin to offer questions about standards of care that help take the next step? Robin, you know what the next steps are. You know what to do here.
I think that what you're beginning to see in the U.S. are a lot of healthcare providers really being out front in this healthy materials advocacy. So whether it's Kaiser and flame retardants or getting rid of triclosan or whatever it is, you're now really beginning to see that what has been a kind of grassroots effort really begin to blossom. Because I do think that healthcare providers are trust holders of health. Despite whatever negative experience you may have had personally, I think we all listen to our doctors at some level. And when they say, you shouldn't be using antimicrobial soap in your house, the next day, like when the pediatrician tells my stepdaughter that, the next day, man, all those products are out of the house, because she's a mom.
Yeah.
So I think that when I would say to her, I don't think you should have antimicrobials, she would say, so what? But when the doctor said it, like they were gone. So I think we have to recognize the power of the healthcare industry, because it is such a large economic engine, to actually push back on some of the worst actors in this drama that we're all living right now, because people listen to them. And because they're a big economic engine. Like the architecture and design industry, we're not effective lobbyists for health with government, with policymakers, et cetera. But the healthcare industry is. And so I think the more that we see healthcare kind of coming to the fore that way, the more the light gets shined on some of these issues. And you get someone like Tyson saying they're not going to put antibiotics in their chickens anymore. The only reason they decided that is that they service the healthcare and school markets. And so when enough healthcare providers said, we're really not interested in antibiotics in our meat, they sort of saw the writing on the wall and said, okay, we're going to figure out how to phase them out. So I think that's what we have to do. And I think we are at a point where this idea of kind of acting locally and partnering is the way to build a sort of counter force to the market prevalence.
So there are, Kaiser Permanente kind of starts this movement, and now there are about 1,200 hospitals that are within that purview, although more or less active and more or less knowledgeable, but they are on board. Now, but there are about 4,000 hospitals. So
6,000.
6,000 or whatever the numbers are. So that 1,200 really is a very small number when you think about this. And so your clients, I mean, you have many healthcare clients, and you work with a lot of different types. What would make them most of them buy into this? Because I think what you're describing,
connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to make these problems. No one wants to be part of these problems.
Right.
I think they just don't realize they are. And so, you know, when you connect the dots for people, they make different decisions. And I've seen it happen over and over again. So there's a real force for us not to connect the dots, and for us to stay in that dance that I described in the food industry, that when you have unlabeled process, in the lemons dance, in the race to the bottom, how many ingredients can we replace in that ceiling panel to make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper? That's why fly ash isn't everything, right? Because it makes it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And as long as you don't know, because it looks the same, you know, it is a race to the bottom in building materials. So I think we all have to keep campaigning for disclosure. I don't think we live in a world where we're going to get the government to do what they did in the food industry and demand labeling for a long time, like not in the foreseeable future. And so I think we have to try to get the market to get there by demanding it in the market.
So those coalitions are becoming really key to all of this now.
I think they are.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's some questions in the audience, and I can't see you. Is there some light that could be put on so that we can actually see you guys? Anyone?
Anybody have a question?
Yes.
Hi. My name is Rachel. I work in manufacturing as well. I work for Microsystems. We're a window shade manufacturer, and I'm their sustainability project manager. So it's more of a comment, but I would also appreciate feedback on this. I was looking at Perkins & Will's rules, and one of them stated, if they won't tell you what's in it, you probably don't want what's in it. And I just wanted to share some personal experience and I've actually seen this assumption before, and it's a frustration that many manufacturers are facing, and there's many times a lot more to the story, that if a company is not necessarily disclosing what's in it, doesn't mean that it's bad for you or that they're trying to hide secret information. I know personally that the chemicals that we are mostly sharing are the ones that are hazardous. It's those other chemicals that are proprietary, that our suppliers are very strict and are very nervous to share with the public based on how we finish a shade. We create a product that doesn't just look pretty, it actually has special solar optical properties with daylight and things of that nature.
So okay, let's cut to commercial. Let's get to the question here.
No, this is not a commercial at all. What I'm trying to say is that if a company is not disclosing a chemical, it's not because that they're trying to hide something. There could be another reasoning. The reasoning for me was what I just explained. And so in my opinion, I think it's, instead of just writing off a company, it's important to form those relationships with the manufacturers and really try to understand what is behind that level of information that is actually being disclosed and what is not, and what are they trying to do to work for it. And I'd love your comments on
I
that.
don't think anybody's trying to write off companies. I think everybody's trying to understand what they're speccing and what the materials are.
Right, but I think your point is really well taken, because I just actually criticized somebody in my own office for doing exactly that. It is more complicated.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little sorry about that rule, because I do think it leads to what you're talking about. And I also think, and I'd love to know what Cliff thinks about this, that we are in this weird moment in the market where disclosure isn't level. Mm-hmm. And so somebody who is willing to come forward and tell you what's in their product with all of its chemicals that may be hazardous, then is put at a market disadvantage because their competitors aren't disclosing at all. And so I think in this weird transitional time, it requires us to be careful about forming judgments, bad or good, based on the information.
So Cliff, what's your response to this?
I think disclosure is important. I don't think there's a huge amount of secrets left in any industry today. I think almost any product can be taken apart and analyzed. I don't think there's a lot of market advantage anymore in that way. So for instance, every single product that we sell has an HPD.
Right.
Because it's not so much what's often in the products.
There you go.
It's not so often what's in the products, but how you manufacture them. It's like you can give someone a great recipe, right? And someone makes a great meal, and you give the friend the recipe, and they go home and try to make it, and it's just not the same, right? So I think it's as much about how you make things and certain processes other than actually what's in the product.
So what's your response to this idea that it's a proprietary material and therefore you can't disclose it? But I think one of the issues that you can also hide behind proprietary, because it could be some of the deadliest material that there are. So how does that become transparent? Because maybe it's not about the proprietary material, but about just the sum total of the ingredients, or what is it? I mean, how do you deal with this question, the proprietary shelter?
Yeah, I think it's changing. I think the younger generation, speaking to healthcare and facilities, and I think the change that you're frustrated with is, I just believe the younger generation cares about all these issues way more than my generation.
Yeah, but can we wait for them?
I think they're here. I mean, they're working in my office, and they have a completely different point of view, and they won't really accept the answers that it's proprietary or it's our trade secret or it's just not acceptable to them anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's really encouraging, but we still have a large layer of practitioners that aren't the younger generation, and so I think, maybe 20 years from now, this will have been resolved, but in that time, there's going to be a lot of problems created with our current system. So, yes, you have a question?
So I'm wondering about the role of education. What do designers and architecture students need to learn in school before they even get into the professional world? Sort of how can an awareness or a perception of the built environment as being made up of chemicals, some good, some bad, before they even sort of get to a place in professional work where they're making decisions and informing their clients? What does architecture school need to do better for that?
Good question.
That's a good question. Who wants to, Robin, do you want to tackle that one? And then we'll go down the line here.
I think architecture and interior design education has always been good at teaching people critical thinking, and those skills have never been more important. I also think understanding the history of the market is really more important than I think it was in my generation. And I think some of the problems that you see in the marketplace comes from a generation of us who were trained to believe that the past didn't matter in a way, like we were just inventing it as we went. But I think there's real meaty lessons to be learned from the evolution of the materials economy for all of you as you go out and confront marketing claims or the next generation of materials. I think it's helpful, because if you think about returning to some first principles, I think having that understanding and not seeing it as kind of dead history, but really evolutionary, is a really important aspect.
So Susan, what's your suggestion for the students?
I think as an owner, we really look to our consultants to bring us as much innovation and open thinking as possible. I mean, we're an organization that is really looking to leap forward, not take baby steps. So having a consultant that's there with us and is resourceful enough to seek out that information for us and really bring it to our attention and educate us is a valued asset. So it may be beyond what you're learning in school. You have to take the initiative and get out there and learn as much as you can on your own.
And then you're a really valued consultant.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I think that's one of the issues that I have with the profession right now, is they're all saying not all, many of them are saying they're dying. Well, because they're not bringing the kind of information that you're looking for to the table. I mean, Robin isn't dying, she's out there fighting like crazy and building.
Except I have all those chemicals in me, so I'm
So do we all. Okay, yeah. So
It's a slow death
Cliff,
if I
what
ever
is your
die.
advice to the students?
Well, I'm not a practicing nor educated designer.
No, but you know everything.
Yeah, I'm a history major. I know a little bit about
There
everything.
you go, you're a history major.
I think in this industry, architects and designers don't generally, they don't see themselves as important enough. I think this is an industry, frankly, that's dominated by manufacturers, and that's a hard truth. Big manufacturers are successful, they have a lot of money, and they drive a lot of the events in this industry and agendas, and I think we need to get to a point where architectural firms, design firms, engineering firms, building owners drive the industry like USGBC rather than manufacturers, because these are the practitioners who are representing the clients, and I hope that's what the future of architecture and design becomes about.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, all three of you are absolutely perfect on this. I would like to add one more thing here, is that you are right now, no matter how smart your teachers are, you're getting the old education. Sorry, Jonsara, maybe not you. No, but I mean, I go through schools all the time, and the kids are way ahead of everybody. I mean, I was just at Stanford, and I was floored by what the grad students there knew and how little their instructors knew at that prestigious institution. So it was eye-opening. So to me, the question to you, throwing it back to you, the person who asked that question, is how do you use your social networks, the power of your networking on information, and stop networking about, whoever the current pop star is or whatever you're networking about, but network about the information that you're hearing, seeing, researching, understanding, and figuring out, because that's where your importance to your clients will be, and that's where you will be indispensable with your knowledge. So add to your knowledge that you're getting in school, and reach out of the school, and then bring that knowledge in and challenge your professors. You need to. I mean, and as a 60s radical, We pushed for women's studies. We got women's studies. We pushed for African American studies. We got African American studies. So if you're really connecting with something, you're going to be able to bring more information to your schools and to your classrooms. Yes. And then that's the last question.
The panel has been very outspoken about both the need for change and impetus for change, being a lot of discussion around transparency and advocacy. I think I'd like to return to this notion of systems-based thinking and an understanding of systems as a driver for change. And Cliff, just because I know the development of your bio-based Sorrel product, I think it would be very interesting to hear your work with that and the push it was to drive change, and I think through a systems-based thinking. And then I was wondering if the panelists could talk about their experience with change that they've seen that's happened on the systems-based impetus or understanding, or something they think might come from that.
That's an excellent question. Cliff.
So we have a high-performance textile for many years. It was fossil fuel-based, as 99.9% of plastics are around the globe, and we've always been very interested in the differential between its chemistry and PVC. It's polyethylene, so it's a much simpler material and much less harmful in terms of what goes into it and what comes out of it. But we were always interested in improving it in many ways, and the biggest possible change was to change the raw material resource. And so it's really just an evolving technology, the use of bio-based materials to make plastics. It's happening around the world, especially in South America, and we had the opportunity to participate in the development of a bio-based plastic material that effectively mimics, or we say biomimicry, mimics the performance of traditional polyethylene. And so it has, and it's easier for a small company to do, frankly, than a big company, because it comes from a belief system more than a study of numbers and outcomes. And I think that system is sort of not a system, because it comes from something deeper than just statistics and hoping to hit a winner. And I think that's how we got there.
But I think what makes it a really smart system is that when you decide to change the basic material, you basically change the system of supply and distribution. And so you have created these kind of wonderful systems around. I mean, when you start using bio-based material, you have to have someone growing it, harvesting it, chopping it up, polymerizing it. I mean, you have created, your participation has created something that you can describe as a system, and I think that's key.
But I think it's way bigger than us, obviously. I mean, this comes from an industry that's sort of evolving and growing in South America, where the growth of sugarcane creates, it's sort of a powerhouse of a plant in terms of producing energy and substituting for fossil fuel products in a number of industries. And we were just sort of smart enough to see the possibilities and make it happen with this product, and replace it in the industry for architects and designers to be able to use something that's high performance and safe and bio-based and a carbon reduction material.
But your decision also hinged on the fact that you observed that fewer and fewer people were putting sugar in their coffee and using less. No, I mean, this is very important. You need to see those signs. It's like reading page 6 in the Daily News.
I still put sugar in my coffee. It's better than that chemical stuff.
No, but I mean, whatever. But I mean, we are going away from a certain use of those sugars. So those sugars are important to other areas. So I think there is something very important there. So Susan, the systems question.
So I'm going to answer it a little differently, because we are kind of rethinking who we are and reestablishing our brand. I mean, we have certainly a stellar history of great clinical care, but
the basis of that is research and how that impacts the way we treat patients and how forward-thinking and advanced that treatment is. And so I think what we're really trying to do is Susan, what you said, is think about how patients fit into that. They aren't just users, they're humans. And we put ourselves in their shoes and say, if I were a patient, what would I expect? What would I need? So, it's a kind of a systematic change in our organization to get everyone to think about that and to make decisions based on that. And so it kind of just grows incrementally, not just from a process and operations perspective, but to an environmental, architectural, technology.
So this reawakens your whole organization.
Absolutely.
So there's an awakened system happening right there. That's pretty cool. Robin?
So systems, products, and buildings. I was thinking the other day about, it's not an interior material, but I was thinking about the difference between using different roofing on buildings, and particularly the difference on a systemic basis between using a high reflectance white roof and a green roof. For those of you who have thought through this problem, because it's interesting that in LEED, there's a point for each thing. You can use a high reflectance PVC roof, get a point, or you can have a green roof and get a point. But what goes unrecognized in that is that while both roofs solve the particular problem of heat island impact, one problem, that's kind of the only problem that a white PVC roof solves. And you still have the PVC, and you still have the water running off the roof and overflowing the sewer system, and you have still all the other problems that arise beyond the manufacture of the white PVC roof in the building. But the green roof solves for the pattern. It produces the habitat, it holds back the water, it protects the roofing membrane so you don't have to do it so often. So it actually creates a sort of cascading series of benefits, like Wendell Berry talks about. It's all good. And that's what we have to think about more. I challenge the USGBC to start thinking about that in their point systems. Like if you got more points for the green roof than you got for the white roof, you might see a whole lot more green roofs happening, because systemically they're not the same solution. And I think we have to get to more of that in our building materials. And we have to think about what those materials would look like. So I'm actually very excited about Ecovative, because I do think that's another potential version of that kind of product, where if you can grow a replacement for polystyrene and then compost it in gardens when you take the building down or whatever, that's a pretty good systemic solution. So, but I don't think we've challenged ourselves to think about our building materials that way.
But what's really interesting, that it's so exciting when you think about it that way, because it really is, it's incredibly positive. I mean, what you're describing is emotionally rewarding and physically healthy.
Yes.
I mean, it sort of serves the whole human need for all of these things to connect. And so I think maybe we don't talk about those kind of basic human needs around these issues as often as we should, because I think that might be part of the discussion, because everybody understands that. Everybody understands health. Everybody understands if you begin to deconstruct the white, PVC or whatever the hell that roof is, and then
rubber.
And then the green roof. I mean, that alone is like a story. That's a great story, and it's a great story to tell kids, to adults, to clients, to everybody, and everybody understands it without making it into an abstract system which nobody understands. So, yeah, I mean, that's a really great place to stop right now. And I think with wonderful panelists like these and inquisitive audiences like you, I think we're heading somewhere good here. So thank you.